Campus Culture. I'm your host, Lamont Holden, professor of music, audio, and recording technology here at the School of Music at the University of Illinois in the Fine and Applied Arts Department. This is Campus Culture, conversations for the culture here on the campus at the University of Illinois and across the country and around the globe. My next guest is a published author and executive team coach. She is also founder of the Change Coaches, where she works with executive leaders to create real change in corporate environments, is the director of leadership and culture at UIUC's Gies College of Business, just released her first book, Leading Below the Surface. Please welcome LaTonya Wilkins.
Yay, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And you came in from Chicago, right?
I did.
How's that little commute?
Today it wasn't, it was a little crabby and it took a little longer than usual.
That's why I left Chicago. I don't like traffic. No,
Yeah.
I'm good. But first of all, we definitely want to talk about the book. I think getting published is a great accomplishment in itself, but even more so providing real valuable information that's accessible and beneficial to all, I think is also an accomplishment. So we definitely want to hear about the book, but one thing in particular that I was hoping you could speak on that kind of popped out to me as I was exploring things is you talked about how neuroscience factors into creating diversity in the workplace. What can you say?
Yeah, so in my book, Leading Below the Surface, when I talk about it, it's really my experiences in Fortune 500 companies and basically in consulting firms coalesced with research through many different people. I should mention that Amy Edmondson, the renowned Harvard researcher that actually named and identified psychological safety, that phenomenon, which many of you have probably heard of, wrote my foreword. And so I knew my book was going to be grounded in science. And so when I talk about science in the book, I talk a lot about, especially neuroscience, I talk a lot about oxytocin. And oxytocin is a chemical in our brain that people call the love hormone. And what happens is when you connect with people, when you laugh, when you give someone a compliment, oxytocin is generated. That's why during COVID, when people were kind of stuck at home, some psychologists and others would tell people to make sure that you say hello to others on the street, because just that little saying hello will boost oxytocin. So with our bonds, we also produce oxytocin. So when I'm coaching folks and I'm feeling bonded, for example, that oxytocin is produced. But what happens is that since this creates kind of like a euphoric feeling, sometimes we tend to migrate towards people that help us generate more oxytocin. And usually those are people who are generally like us. If we're connecting with people who are different from us, typically there is a drop in productivity or a drop in real connection at first, because it takes a little bit longer. And so with that, I talk about this phenomenon called humans excluding to belong. Sometimes we exclude because we belong to something, and we want to belong to that so much, and we want to keep it close so much because it produces that effect of oxytocin. So I could go on and on about this, but those are some of the highlights of neuroscience in my book.
So one, that explains why I get good feelings when I see other black folks.
Yes, right.
So that's one. And then two, there's literally I could see the other side to it. There's literally a neuroscience reason for racism. That's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's more, I would say, in inclusion and belonging. So I would say, and in my book, I also tell childhood stories, and one was around one kid that was like the popular kid, and I was in 5th grade, and she made fun of my picture, and all the kids migrated towards her, and she had so much influence, and that's more of that. It's more of trying to flock to the person, again, where you're going to get kind of that surge in that oxytocin and that feeling.
Yeah, I definitely, you got me. I'm going to get the book.
Yeah.
Right? That's enough. You're sold. Question one. So I want to know more about your origin story and how you found yourself in a position to educate people on leadership and culture and business here at the University of Illinois.
Yeah, and so I talk a little bit about this in my book as well, but I kind of started off, got a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I thought I wanted to work in nonprofits. I got a job in a nonprofit, didn't work out. And so then I ended up going into recruiting, And then I went back and like 4 years later, I wanted to do something a little bit bigger. So I went back and got my MBA at the Kellogg School of Business. And so then I kind of went into that, launched me into this corporate career. And I worked for all these different companies doing talent and leadership development and leading leadership development, which is very eye-opening because that put me in a lot of meetings where we talked about talent. And we talked about, we tried to fill our succession pipelines, and we tried to make sure that we had a diverse workplace within leadership. And so I did this for quite a while. Towards the end, I wasn't inspired anymore. And so that's when I started putting feelers out. This was probably like 6 years ago or so. And that's when I was like, I think I'm going to start my own business. And so I started talking to some people, and I was really interested in tech. And so I was kind of dually interviewing in tech and also contemplating starting my own business. And then someone who I actually met in one of my first jobs at a business school, he had said, hey, the Gies College of Business, we weren't Gies back then, but the College of Business at the University of Illinois is looking for a director of talent. Would you be interested? And I'm like, I don't know, that's kind of far, I'm not sure. And I never even thought about higher education that way. And long story short, I ended up going through the process, and the minute that I met our dean, Jeff Brown, I knew that he was gonna sell me on this somehow. If you haven't met Jeff Brown, he's a very charismatic person. He's also a very good salesperson in that way, but also in an authentic way. And so by the end of our meeting, he was like, hey, when can you move here? Or when can you start? And so that was before I kind of went through everything. I mean, I think he was joking, but we just had this immediate connection because I think he saw all these ways that I could really help the Gies College of Business. And so, so I started in that role. And during that role, I ended up getting my coaching certification with the International Coach Federation. They were very supportive of that. And then I ended up starting my business and playing around and seeing what I wanted to do. And so probably about a year or so ago, I was appointed the Director of Leadership and Culture there. And so in that position, I mainly work with Jeff Brown and Denise Lloyd, who is our head of equity, DEI, on making Gies a more inclusive place. So how did I get here? Well, I mean, as you see, it was a long game. I had a lot of different experiences. I think it was luck that I was honestly introduced to Jeff Brown, and that happened. And so, I think it's a combination of, number one, getting my education, which I think is very important. Number two, getting some great experiences. And number three, following my gut. And I knew it was time to go, and I knew it was time to do something different. And I took a dive, and I did something that I hadn't even imagined before.
Yeah. And I think it's important to unpack that story because, as I think back on my undergrad experience, my first job out of here, it was a corporate job, right? First of all, I wanted to make a lot of money, but what I found out, it wasn't for me. And I found out that what I was doing, it wasn't all that much money, right? And so when I think about those experiences, looking back on the last 20 years and thinking about students that would be coming to here, right? What is my postgraduate experience going to look like, right? So I like to be as current as possible, right? So as I preface this question, as of fourth quarter 2021, which some people are graduating in December, right? COVID, things are thrown off. Somebody's going to, actually, I remember I graduated in December, started a job in January, right? What is the most accurate description or portrayal of the type of culture and climate a graduate of Gies or any business school in America may face, and particularly a graduate of color or other marginalized community?
Yeah, so there are a couple big things going on right now in the job market. Number one, we have what we're calling the Great Resignation. And so if you haven't heard, an enormous number of people have left their jobs. And they left their jobs not for like all the reasons you would think, like more money, like those reasons I call surface more in my book. That doesn't mean that you might not need more money, but they're leaving to find things that are meaningful to them. They kind of stuck that job out through the pandemic, and they're leaving. I'm seeing this amongst some of my own clients, especially some of the executives I coach. I've had a lot of companies hire me to kind of retain some executives during this time period. And so what new graduates are going to face is a job market that's affected by this. There's going to be a lot of movement. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities. The job market's also very good. And if you are Black or brown, you're probably going to have a lot of opportunities. I think that's another thing that's happening is, well, especially if you are Black or brown, because I think the economies get across the board, but companies are specifically looking for diversity. And they're looking for visible diversity, and they're also looking for other types of diversity. And so you might come out, I mean, like I said, a lot of the executives I coach, if they're looking for a new position, they're getting 3-4 offers, right? And so you're gonna come out with more offers. And then you're probably going to come out in a different time where you're able to shape culture in ways that you've never been able to do. And so I wanna kind of encourage all of you that are coming out of college to be brave, to be courageous, and to speak your mind and make change and strive for, demand psychological safety in your work environments, because there's a lot more demands that we can make. And I think we have to articulate what we need in these companies in order to stay. Companies are doing okay with hiring, but they're not doing great with retaining, especially people of color. And you could read my book, especially if you are a graduate. It would be really great for you because it's going to tell you how to navigate this workplace, especially when you're running into challenges. So yeah, that's a little bit about what you're going to face. Again, Great Resignation. I think that means that there's going to be a lot of movement, and you're going to have multiple offers. And again, speak your mind at work.
Yeah, we'll get to it at the end, but just so we establish it, and I believe in repetition, Kobe. Where can we get the book?
Oh, yeah. So there are many different places where you can get it. Amazon, obviously. Some people don't like Amazon. It's also on Bookshop, if you hate Amazon. But, okay, let me tell you.
You seem so conflicted when you said that.
Well, us authors, we like Amazon because it's the largest bookseller in the world. And so it gives us a lot of exposure. And the algorithms help our books, too. So Amazon would be the first place. You can also get it at Target, Barnes & Noble, many other bookstores, some local bookstores in Chicago, and then Bookshop. So if you're someone that wants to support local bookstores, you can get it at Bookshop. As of November 4th, I'll be releasing the paperback and the ebook version. So if you are in a university, I've had some universities reach out, that will be available as well.
So I'd like to believe that in acknowledging and exploring each other's cultural differences, what we are actually doing is creating room for people to get perspectives that benefits the communities that we share as a whole. How do you think your perspective, with experience in corporate climates as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, can positively influence leaders who will go on to shape a generation of folks in the workplace?
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess I talk about this a lot in the book, and I'm kind of hesitating here because I think you're asking how my identity benefits corporations. I think that's what you're...
Yeah, and let me be more clear, right?
Yeah.
Like, we bring these different perspectives to the table, right?
Yeah.
I'm able to understand things about the world that I might not have had a chance to by meeting different people, right? Like, how does that shape? Because then when you shape those people, they shape those future generations, right? And I think that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been experiences that have been good and accepting, and there have been experiences that have not been so good and accepting. And I talk about this in my book. There have been some experiences where I interviewed and I felt like there were some issues with that part of me, and you can tell, through your gut. I will tell you that as far as, how that's educated leaders or elevated leaders, is that I think that when people can see that I'm able to make such a difference in the workplace, and I'm kind of serving kind of as a model, like sometimes I don't even know that I'm this model, but serving as a model for other LGBTQ plus youth or LGBTQ plus leaders, or even I'm a model for a lot of even people that aren't LGBTQ plus that just really want to see different types of perspectives in the world. Maybe they don't resonate with that dominant leadership standard, and I talk about that in chapter 2. And so it's just refreshing for them to see something different. Yeah. And so I think that seeing that difference and seeing that it can be successful is just like refreshing to a lot of people. And that's the word I'm using, because that's the word that I always get is, wow, this is just a breath of fresh air to see someone different write a book about leadership. And it's actually a really good book. And I've been getting that compliment a lot because a lot of these types of books that are written are usually white men. And I'm not saying that they're not qualified to write these books, but so they're not really speaking to us, right? And so I think with all of these different identities I have that some of them have marginalized me, and being able to speak to that, there's something in that for people. There's a lot of inspiration in that for people. Again, even if they don't identify that way, because they have other things that are in them that they identify with that sideline them as well. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
What I identify with is the fact that you're comfortable in your own skin.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then that's able to keep, that keeps the main thing, right? We're here to do business. But then also these identities just help present this like perspective, because I like to think at the end of the day, when we bring different perspectives, it makes the thing we're doing better. It's best practice, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, would you say that leading below the surface is best practice?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say, I talk a lot about surface leaders, and I still think that's the majority of the workplace. I would say up to 80% of leaders. And when I talk about surface leaders, again, those are stick to business leaders. Those are don't talk about anything else personal, don't bring any of that to work. And below the surface leaders are about 20% of leaders, and they practice the empathy, the psychological safety, and what I call real leadership in the book. And yes, when you look at the research, it's definitely aligned. And I will tell you that it is best practice in that way, and we've got to make it best practice because, again, we don't have these voices in leadership, and we need it. Like, I'm here at BNAACC, and I see all these beautiful Black students that are young, and they need people. They need to see this. They need different perspectives on leadership, especially in corporate. All the books I read in business school, I mean, I talk about this in my book, where I've taught lots of leadership classes, and whenever I go to a leadership library, every single book is written by a white dude. And if it's not a white dude, it's a white woman, and there's like maybe 1 in 10 of those, right? And you probably know all those authors, right? And so, again, it's best practice, and what is best practice? We gotta make our own practices, right? And this is the time for us to do it.
Wow, what an impassioned answer. That made so much sense. I mean, it's awesome. I think that's really 21st century leadership. I think that's leadership that allows for the entire person to come into the workplace. And I think you'll ultimately get more out of people.
Absolutely.
Humans really are the resource. For prospective students of color who are looking for a business school to call home, and in particular those who may one day call Gies School of Business home, what advice can you give them about their education and their career?
Yeah, I would say that students and graduates and alums at Gies, and I was talking to someone about this the other day, are very bright, and they're very driven and competitive. And what I would say is, so a lot of the times when I'm working with these C-suites, they're all that too. They're all very competitive.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So the C-suites is all C-levels in a business. So that's like the top executive team. So they all have roles that probably begin with chief. That's why we call them C-suite. So chief executive officer, chief HR officer, chief CFO, chief financial officer. So anything that starts with the C is typically the C-suite. And in the C-suite, when I'm coaching teams to create cultures of belonging, they want a hard charge and say, let's do all these things, let's get this done, because that's what they do, that's how they're measured, and that's that standard. But if you're going to be a student and you're feeling that competitive drive, take a step back, take a breather, have some fun, get to know some other schools on campus, like try to study something interdisciplinary, learn another language. Like, these are the types of things that don't just think about being corporate and getting a corporate job that's going to pay you a lot. There's so much more to life than that. I love how, obviously you're an artist, and like thinking about that artist side of you. I wish I would have done that more. I mean, I was a psychology major, but now I'm like, when you get a little bit older, you see how important arts are, and arts and business kind of go hand in hand. And I think we're finally starting to see that. And so find the art side of you, find that creative side of you. And if you're in business, that creative side might be entrepreneurship. So try to develop some things on your own. But again, don't come in and just compete and try to get all the highest test scores, because when you look outside in the world, that stuff doesn't matter 5 years from now. Nobody cares. 5 years from now, no one's going to care. I'm sorry, but they're not going to care what your GPA is unless you're applying to grad school. But once you apply to grad school and you get out, they're not going to care. You have to have something that is respectable, but if you're trying to get like a 4.0 or 4.2, stop it. Try to do some other things on campus and revisit if you are being a little bit hard on yourself. So that's the inspiration I'll give you.
I couldn't have said that better myself. I was teaching a class this morning. A student brought a medical note to me. I said, for as much money as they're paying this school, the professor should be bringing medical notes to the students. So that's a great piece of advice, most definitely. So this is campus culture, and we want to get into a little bit of the culture before we see if our audience has any Q&A. But first of all, so you heard about Illini Anthem. You told me before we started, right?
Yeah.
So and that's part of kind of one of the things we're doing here is I produced the song. Jarrel Young wrote and performed the song. What'd you think?
Yeah, actually, I was pleasantly surprised. I was actually kind of. It kind of came out of left field when I heard it, and it's funny because the day that I listened to it, I told like 3 people. I said, "Hey, this dude just created all this, and it's like the anthem with a hip hop flair, and it's like the remix." That's what I said.
Yeah.
That's what we called it, right?
Yeah.
I was like, "This is like the remix," and so I'm really happy to see that we could celebrate in that way, especially when it's football season. You look and you watch these bands and they're not playing that kind of stuff, and to hear that and see it. I mean, when you think about, and not just sports, but again, arts and music, but when you think about these bands and the influence isn't that, or hasn't been that. And that just gives me this glimmer of hope, and this door is cracked open, and we can kick it in at some point where there's going to be songs that are this way. I mean, you see that at HBCUs, but you don't see it at PWI. So when I saw it, I was like, wow, this is like HBCU
It's funny
style,
you should say that, because when we talked about it, I said, it's easy to take something from an HBCU, but then I have to remember, like, black people have been coming to this school for a long time.
Right.
Like, we are homegrown at UIUC as well. You know what I'm saying? So what's on your playlist right now? You just had a 2-hour car ride. What were you listening to? Podcast, music, what's up?
I was mainly listening to podcasts. I would say, as far as music right now and media, I really like this morning show called The Get Up on Spotify, and so I love it because it's a morning show, and it's all folks of color that are producing it, and then they deliver a playlist that's made for you. And so I've really loved getting to know them also as some of the anchors on that. I have a long book list, so now that I've finished this book, that's kind of what I'm tackling next. And some of those books I'll probably do as audiobooks. So yeah, that's typically what I'm doing. I like anything Wondery. So I love anything Wondery puts out. I just think it's great journalism. And they recently released one called Suspect. And I don't want to tell you too much about that, but check that out. It's another podcast series that's produced by Wondery. And so, yeah, that's really what I'm doing. And like I said, I like a lot of different types of music. And a lot of the music I listen to today comes from the Get Up, I would say.
Awesome. So before we get out of here, just let us know where we can find you on social media, your websites, and where we can find the book one more time. Yeah.
So I'll start with the book, and the book is called Leading Below the Surface, and what's really easy is the website is leadingbelowthesurface.com, and so you could go ahead and pick up the book there. We also have some tools and resources that you may want to check out. And then on Instagram, I'm LaTonya Coaching, and then I'm also on LinkedIn, which is it's LaTonya Wilkins. And then I'm also on Twitter at LaTonya Wilkins.
Very awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Jazmyne Kellogg and the good folks here at the Bruce Nesbitt African American Cultural Center on the campus here at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'd like to thank Boots Howard and our production staff. And thank you to our guest, LaTonya Wilkins. And please go get her new book, Leading Below the Surface. Thank you for joining us on Campus Culture.